I'm James Chow. You're watching the Pacific Dialogue, where we bring you the United States and China unscripted. I'm thrilled this week to honor two people who have done so much through their work and through their lives to shape the world and humanity. Professor Ezra Vogel, who is the former director of the Fairbanks Center at Harvard University, and Professor Qingguo, Dean of International Studies at Peking University. You're over in Beijing and over in Boston. I'm in Hong Kong. But what about the world we live in today? Foreign Minister Wang Yi says that about 4 decades on from the China-United States forging this diplomatic relationship, they've now hit their lowest point. Qingguo, do you agree with what he says?
Well, it is at least one of the lowest points, depending on how you measure it. I think politically speaking, the relationship is at the lowest point. But if you talk about economic relations, social contacts, I think we are way ahead of that. So I think the political relationship is at the lowest point since then, yeah.
Professor Vogel, you've seen this relationship literally open and develop and evolve in its many beautiful and complex ways. Some people call it the lowest point. Jimmy Carter warned about a year and a half ago that they were heading towards a modern Cold War. Are these just words, or have they come now to full fruition?
I agree with Qingguo that politically we're perhaps at our lowest point. As you know, our Pompeo made a speech the other day that all of us who consider US-China relations important thought was terrible. And the reaction has been very strong to that speech. And I think politically the discussions of coronavirus, where each country blames the other and the leaders blame the other country and probably say things that are not true, they exaggerate, is really very serious and very dangerous. And I agree that politically it's at the worst. And at the same time, we still have many contacts, even in the medical field. We have people in the two countries working together. We certainly have many businessmen working together, scholars working together. So it's not like it was in '73 when I first visited China, when there was almost no contact at all.
You talk about the pandemic, and of course, apart from the political cost, there's the cost of human lives. People are being infected, people are dying each and every day. We'll return to the pandemic, and perhaps also, if we may, to your early experiences in 1973. But Professor Vogel, your new piece in the Washington Post recalls many of the Chinese students that you've taught over many decades. You say that they're now being torn between a loyalty to their own country, a genuine loyalty, but also an affection for America, who many of them would see as their second home. Is it now impossible in a binary world to balance both interests, to be friends with both?
Well, they feel like I do, that I want to be patriotic to my own country, but I want to have good relations with the other country. And many of them who were here enjoyed the time here. And when Americans criticize without thinking, and they criticize every member of the Communist Party as if they were all the same, as if they all hated America, that's just not true. And for the many who were here and want to be patriotic to China, want to help their country, but want to maintain good relations with their friends and their studies, their fellow scholars and colleagues in the United States, they're put in a bind. And I think many of them that I know want to be patriotic. They want to help their country. Of course, they're proud of their country. But at the same time, they realize there are many good Americans, and even though American government policy now toward China is very nasty, and Trump and Pompeo say some crazy things, they know that many Americans are still ready to be good friends and work with them.
Well, Professor Vogel wrote this piece, as we said, in the Washington Post, which I'm sure Qingguo, you also saw as well. So, Professor Jia, what he says over there, what he writes in the headline about US policies pushing friends of China towards anti-American nationalism. I mean, how do you stop this from evolving further? You've seen in your own country, in Chengdu, an American consulate shut down just in the last day or two. We saw a couple of days before that, the Chinese consulate in Houston, after many years, a very important mission there, also shut down. How do you say stop? Pause. If we can't go forward, that's okay, but how do we pause and then stop the rot almost from seeping further into the soil?
Well, it's difficult. At the moment, I think the Trump administration appears to be determined to provoke some kind of a crisis in order to enhance his political position at home for re-election. So it's very difficult to stop it. And also, there is domestic politics in China too. So when the U.S. closes down the Houston consulate, China feels that it has to close down the Chengdu consulate. And if the U.S. decides to do something else, and Chinese government may feel necessary to do something else. So the relationship is still at a slippery slope, deteriorating. And I just hope that people on both sides would cool down and take a more pragmatic approach to handle the relationship. It's difficult, but I think people on both sides should make some efforts.
Professor Vogel.
There's some news in the United States I would like to tell you about that just the last 2 or 3 days that I think puts a new slant on things. And that after Pompeo's speech, the reaction in the United States was very virulently against it. And a lot of people who had not been speaking out are now speaking out. And in the last 3 days, in addition to my article in the Washington Post, there have been several prominent articles that are critical of Pompeo, much more than in the past. One was from the New York Times editorial page that came out yesterday. The whole editorial page was very critical of Pompeo, saying that, we can't go that far. We have to live in a world with China. We have to find a way to working with them. Secondly, there was an article in the National Interest by a man named Paul Heer, who was the National Intelligence Officer for Asia for 7 or 8 years. And he is very critical and goes into the details of what is wrong with the speech. And at CSIS, there was an article that just came out now that said that we were wrong to deal with Huawei in the way we did. It's in America's economic interest to keep open all those channels. And even our semiconductor industry needs to have sales to a lot of other countries in order to keep the preeminent position that it now has. So I sense in the United States now, just in the last 3 or 4 days, the Pompeo speech has aroused such an opposition that it makes me very hopeful. And of course, Trump will not change before the election. I'm afraid they will say a lot of things, and I'm afraid a lot of the Democratic candidates will also say a lot of things that are not good for promoting good China-U.S. relations. But I think that there is forming now a group of people who are much more expressive, who are beginning to say we've gone too far. That makes me much more hopeful that if we get a new president in January, that we can begin to try to pull the relationship back to a better one.
There are still obviously a few moving parts, and as you said, Professor Vogel, a few ifs still involved in all this, and there's a long way to go till the election, even beyond that. But let's go back to you, Professor Jia, because you recently had a conversation with China File. In that conversation, you described China's diplomacy as being consistent with the past. Does that necessarily indicate or infer that what has significantly changed in that time has been the United States' approach to its relationship with Beijing, or is that in itself an oversimplification?
Well, what I meant is that China's the substantive aspects of Chinese foreign policy have not changed very much. China still wants to have a peaceful international environment for domestic reforms and economic development, and China still adheres to the sovereignty principle against foreign intervention. So, in substance, China's foreign policy has not changed that much, but in style and in posturing, it has changed a great deal. It's more proactive in doing things, and that, in a way, get a lot of people having the idea that China's foreign policy has changed. I think at the substantive level, the change is not that significant. But of course, China has risen with greater capabilities. So many of the things that previously were viewed with less importance, now people attach a lot of importance to it. So we have a different situation.